you so much. So thank you for having me here. So I have some bios, and I did it actually in alphabetical order because that's just the way my brain processes. So I'm going to start with Ann Byrn. Is a food writer and New York Times best-selling author from Nashville who is either in the kitchen or in the garden. Ann's iconic The Cake Mix Doctor cookbook gave transformative life to the box cake mix, and I actually have a copy of that, and it's really beat up, so that's why I didn't bring it for signing because it's too terrible.
Falling apart.
Ann is a Georgia native, has had a long and wide-ranging career in food writing. She served as a food editor at the Atlanta Constitution Journal, studied classic French cooking in Paris, and even interviewed Julia Child. Ann loves baking biscuits and chocolate cakes, dogs, and listening to a good story. Baking in the American South, 200 recipes and their untold stories is her latest offering to the cookbook arena. So welcome, Ann.
Thank you. Thank you.
The next person we have is Dale Gray. Dale is from Brookhaven, Mississippi, and was born in South Africa. After graduating from Stellenbosch University, she moved to South Korea to teach English and spent 6 years there. In her last year in South Korea, she met a soldier from Mississippi and they fell in love. They moved back to the US, and that's where Dale began to experiment with both Korean and South African flavors, along with the Southern dishes she was introduced to. She began sharing her recipes via social media, and her works were featured in some publications like Martha Stewart, Savor, and Food and Wine, to name a few. South of Somewhere is her latest cookbook featuring her creations. She lives in Brookhaven, Mississippi with her husband.
Hey.
Welcome, Dale. Ann Taylor Pittman is from Birmingham, Alabama, and is a two-time James Beard Foundation award-winning recipe developer, editor, cookbook author, writer, and content packager. Among her accomplishments include developing and testing hundreds of recipes, staffed and supervised the finest healthy cooking test kitchen, freelance writer, editor, cook, and mom. She has spoken at Southern Foodway Alliance events and at IACP. She now writes and creates for Food and Wine, Southern Living, to name a few. Her latest cookbook, The Global Pantry, shows how to unlock the secrets of the global pantry by elevating all of your favorite foods. Welcome, Ann. And last but not least, we have Robert St. John. Robert St. John is born and raised in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and is a restaurateur, author, philanthropist, and international travel guide. Fueled by his mission to create community and serve others, he leads Onward Hospitality with concepts in both Hattiesburg and here in Jackson. Robert has spent 4 decades in the restaurant business, is the author of 13 books, the creator and co-host of Palate to Palate on PBS, the founder of the Institute for Southern Storytelling at Mississippi College, as well as serving on several boards. He is the husband to Jill and the dad to 2 children. His latest book, Mississippi Mornings, Deep South Breakfast, Brunches, and Musings, clearly reinforces just how much of a breakfast guy he really is. So welcome, Robert. So I have to start that. So in researching each of your cookbooks, I have to just give each of you like your flowers because each of the books are stunning in creation and in just everything, the pictures, the recipes, all of the content. So I have to tell you that I really enjoyed reading your books. They're very different in their content, so I have some questions geared to each of you, but this is a family occasion. So at any point, if anyone else, please jump in with a comment or question or concern. So I'm going to start with Ann Byrn. I would love to know, how did cultural factors affect baking in the South? For example, railroads, boarding houses, the Great Migration, poverty and isolation.
Are we ready to stay all night?
So,
I'll give you the short
yes,
version.
please.
This started out to be a cookbook, a baking cookbook. But once I dove into it, I realized that it was more than baking. Everything we do in the kitchen is really more. It reminds us, recipes remind us of people. And if I go back in time and I mention a certain recipe, I cannot escape the fact that it happened, it was made during the Depression, or if it was made because of railroads. And those stories and that part of history and culture came into the recipe head notes because that was how I set the stage for everybody. And culture has affected everything in the South. I mean, it's who we are. And time and history, it's the land we live on, it's the people who have settled here either by their own will or forcibly were brought here. I mean, all of those are factors in the way the South bakes. And because of railroads, we have people moved. We had migration. We had products moving between cities. We had cantaloupes coming to, you know, certain parts of Alabama where they didn't grow. We had bananas landing in Mobile, Gulfport, and New Orleans, and they were heading on up east. So I think because of every factor through history, it has affected what we make in the kitchen.
I think that was a good point. And a lot of the things that I saw in the book that you had is just the sources that you use, like using recipes from cafeteria workers
Yeah.
and just finding old church cookbooks and things like that. And I wanted to also know, like, what were some of the influences of the different cultures in Southern baking?
Right. Wow. So many. I mean, I did very much want this to be a book of, I say, high and low, black and white, sweet and savory, past and present. It was to me because all of that factors into to the South, in our story in the South. Um, I I think that sugar and slavery are the two most difficult topics to talk about when you're talking about Southern baking because we have such warm and fuzzy feelings, about recipes of a meringue pie or a pound cake that was made by our family members. But it doesn't take long to look back in the history of the South, and things weren't as rosy. And I thought that was important to bring up as well. Hope
And
I
that was
answered your
definitely
question.
noticed in the book, and I appreciate, just as a culinarian and as a chef, to be able to see the perspectives of things that are difficult to talk about, but they're very important in talking about it because that is part of the culture and the landscape of Southern culture
Absolutely.
and cuisine. So I definitely appreciated that perspective that you have. Um, Dale, I have a question for you as
Mhm.
well. I'm loving the duality of expansive and familiar culinary lens through the Mississippi perspective, that is showing up not only locally but also nationally and abroad. How do you feel that your work, as a cookbook writer, as a content creator, contributed to this widespread appreciation and a curiosity for Mississippi and Mississippi cuisine now?
Yeah, I think I'm not originally from Mississippi, so I came in here with like kind of a fresh perspective and with a curiosity to discover more. And the more I tasted and the more I learned, the more I wanted to tell people about it. And I think having a nice social media following is, a really great tool to tell people about things that they might not have heard about. I absolutely love the South. I love where I find myself now here in Mississippi. Feel that people are so welcoming and warm, and in a lot of ways it reminds me of my community back in South Africa. There are so many similarities between us.
What are some of the similarities that you could just talk about briefly that really speaks to you?
Yes, I would say the African philosophy of Ubuntu, which I write about in my book, which is about community togetherness and what is the word I'm looking for? Community compassion, and really valuing each group's contribution to the whole. I think I feel that a lot here in Mississippi with Southern hospitality.
Mm-hmm.
I think that comes through really strong, especially in a very small town where I
Yes.
live in Brookhaven, Mississippi. I felt so welcomed by everyone. And I think that's really what made me say, okay, I'm ready to settle here in Mississippi.
I love it. I love
Oh.
it. So, Anne, I have a question for you. The importance of having a full pantry was prevalent throughout your cookbook. How do you think nostalgia and current trends lend to the well-stocking of a kitchen pantry?
Well, nostalgia fuels so much of what we do with food. I think so many people, whether you cook food for a living or not, so much of your food memories are tied up in family, traditions, community. And I think those connections tie into the food that we crave when we need to feel community and connection. Those things tie into what we want to cook when we want to show love. Actually, I say any act of cooking is an act of love, period. Um, but there are certain times when you want to show more love than others. I mean, there's also spite cooking, but that's a whole different thing. We won't talk about that here. So definitely, a well-stocked pantry. So let me just kind of go on a side note here. I worked in the magazine business for 20-something years, and I was connected to a larger group of cooks across the country. I worked at Cooking Light magazine for 20 years. Loved it. And now I contribute to magazines like Southern Living and Food and Wine. And so I value very much the perspective of everyday cooks across the country who need inspiration. They want to get dinner on the table. They want to provide nourishment and love to their families and their loved ones. And they need help. And whenever, I share a recipe, I understand that someone is taking a risk on me and I want to come through for them. So all that to say, a well-stocked pantry with ingredients that can get you to those foods you love and crave, and those foods that make you feel community and that make you feel nurtured, that's a big part of it. And the book that I wrote last year, we span the globe to expand your pantry, and those global ingredients have a place, and certainly foods from the origin country, but also and kind of breathing new life into family flavor.
And Robert, hey. I see that you're from Hattiesburg, and your latest book, you refer to the cooking of that region as Piney Woods cuisine. I would love to hear more about. Would you like to elaborate on that?
I'd love to. Yeah. Yeah. I never have any problem elaborating on anything, if you know me. So, before I start, though, I want to say thanks for having me up here, and thanks to everybody in the room for coming out and for your interest in food and cookbooks.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can take a little bit of personal pleasure at this point, right behind my wife, Jill, over there are two people, Malcolm White and Carol Puckett, who are my dear friends. And if you're in this room, you're obviously interested in food, and I'm sure you listen to Deep South Dining, right? Everybody does on Monday morning. So we appreciate what they do for the food scene in Mississippi. And the lady to Malcolm's right, and this is not conjecture, and this is not empty rhetoric. I am dead serious when I tell you, I promise you, I would not be sitting here in this seat today, true story, if not for that lady right there. And I'm gonna give a quick, if you just allow me 1 second, because the Clarion Ledger, in its heyday, when papers were papers, had two world-class features writers, Billy Watkins and Sherry Lucas, who also focused on food. And the Hattiesburg American had asked me to start writing a food column, and I did, and it was terrible for a long time. And somehow Sherry and I got hooked up together. I don't know, I think it was at a Willie Morris event in Yazoo City. And I started writing in the paper, and when my first cookbook came out that I did with White Waters. She did an interview, and there was a full page, like, color feature in the Sunday paper the Sunday before Mistletoe Marketplace on that first book, and it went nuts. And I'm going to tell you, if not for that article, I promise you, I would not be here. There would maybe be one book, and that was it. There wouldn't be, I think we're 15 with the Eudora. So I want to thank Sherry, not only for what she's done for my career, but what she's done for Mississippi in general. Let's give her one more round. So Piney Woods Cuisine, Hattiesburg, everybody knows where Hattiesburg is, right? I'm an hour due north of Gulfport in the Gulf of Mexico. I'm an hour and a half northeast of New Orleans. And I'm in the middle of the piney woods of South Mississippi. That Hattiesburg was founded on pine timber. And so if you think about eating locally and what that means, then what you have and what Piney Woods Cuisine is to me and my style of cooking is, it's a lot of seafood. I'm 1 hour north. So our restaurants, we get, 6 fresh seafood deliveries a week. Sorry, not a day. So we've got all the great Gulf seafood that comes our way. Then you've got those Creole Cajun seasonings and sensibilities that come up as well. That creeps in to Hattiesburg. And then you've really got like the Southern Garden, fresh vegetables, and people who raised hogs and all of that. So where all of that comes together, seafood, Creole Cajun, and just kind of country cooking soul food, that's really what Piney Woods Cuisine is. And I believe, and I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir on this one, but, food in the South, and especially Mississippi. Morgan Freeman was asked one time, some reporter kind of snidely said, you could live anywhere in the world. Why do you live in Mississippi? And he said, I live in Mississippi because I could live anywhere in the world. And then he followed that up with, I'd live here for the food alone. And that's true. I mean, we've got nobody's holding forums on, food that's cooked in Idaho. It's just, people in Idaho are way more interested in what we're doing down here than what we are, although they make good potatoes. So we did grow potatoes. That's it. Yeah.
Oh, that was okay.
I can keep going if you
I
want
mean,
me to now.
I was just
You're going to have
so
to shut me down.
No, I was just really fascinated by the Piney Woods cuisine because part of being a chef, a lot of the things that I understand is that I think sometimes people try to put Mississippi in not only the culture but the food into just one box. And even there are regions in Mississippi, and they have different ingredients, different traditions, different cultures. And I was so fascinated about this Piney Woods cuisine and the name for it, and it's so fitting.
I'll give you one quick example of a dish that I created. I'm not going to give the story behind it, it's long. But there's a dish we serve at the restaurant. I think it's in the first cookbook. It's called baked shrimp and squash. And actually, it's a squash casserole that came out of maybe Come On In or Southern Sideboards that my mom used to make. It's a really good, I'm not sure which one it is, but it's in that book. And I used to eat that because my mom made it. And then at the restaurant, I was trying to think, we were trying to use squash, a long story behind that. But they know the story. And so, we took shrimp and sauteed that in like Creole seasoning. And then I tweaked that squash casserole and put it together. And if you think about it, so it's shrimp from the Gulf, it's Creole and Cajun flavors from New Orleans, and then it's squash from the South Mississippi Garden. And so that, to me, is kind of a prime example of Piney Woods cuisine.
I love that. So I have, again, like I'm not paid to like promote these books, but I'm just going to tell each of you like my favorite thing out of the book. And then what I would like for you to do is not that I don't think you need any problem with selling people on why they need to buy your book, but I want you to tell like one dish or one thing, one story, one anecdote or something that would just lock it in for them to purchase this book. So for me, I'm going to go right down the row. So for your book, it was the home cured bacon.
Yeah.
Because it made it possible. I was just like, I could do this. because I'm always thinking that it's just like too ambitious. It was not too ambitious. I think I could totally do that. Dale, it was the shabashuka. Did I pronounce that right? Shabashuka. It's like a tomato. Did I pronounce it?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't want to butcher it. I thought that was gorgeous. I don't eat egg, but if I was to make something with that, I love the tomatoes in that. Um, and and it was the Texas kolaches
Oh, yeah, pretty good.
because when I lived in Houston, I would get I'm a savory kolache girl. I'm not a sweet kolache girl, so I would get the jalapeno pepper sausage with cheese kolache. Way too much, too often. But that was just like, to me, that's a very Texas-y thing. And I saw that recipe in the book, and I was like, okay, I have to tackle dough, which is not in my wheelhouse. But I'm gonna try it because of you. So thank you for that. And also, and lastly, whew, it was the Mexican chorizo ground pork burger because I just love chorizo anything. So anything and a burger, it was just awesome. So now you get to pitch to us, each of you to do your little infomercial and tell us why we need to get this book because it's this for me, for you. Everyone doesn't need to jump at one time. I see the excitement and enthusiasm in it. You can take a little bit of time to think about it, but I would just love to hear from each of you from your creation. Sell it to us.
Ladies first.
And just told me to go. Okay, I'll go. And I'll try not to make it 20 minutes long. So, my latest cookbook I co-authored with a man named Scott Mowbray, who's a good friend of mine and used to be my boss at Cooking Light. So our book is called the Global Pantry Cookbook. And what it's about is global pantry products because for centuries, people across the world have been perfecting the concentration and gathering of flavors through fermentation or concentration, aging, or just harvesting. Okay, so we have a big glossary at the front of the book with all these different ingredients. We originally wanted it to be Asian ingredients, but our publisher said no. Let's do the world. So it's A to Z across the world, 65-ish ingredients where we kind of give flavor notes, shopping intel, tell you how to store it, give you recipes in the book that use that ingredient, but also give you ideas beyond the recipe. So you're not stuck with a bottle of oyster sauce and you only know one dish to make with it. So my favorite dish in the book is my husband's over there. It's his favorite dish in the book. And it kind of embodies the spirit of the book. So it's chili shrimp and coconut grits. Ooh. And it is also it is also the recipe that started everything. So I said that my book co-author is Scott was my boss. And he used to live in Birmingham. He was born in Canada and moved to Indonesia when he was an adolescent, and that's a whole story that he explains in the book. His dad was a doctor with care. He came, we would share notes about, my Korean mother, but also my American Southern dad and kind of the food culture I grew up with. He would share stories about Southeast Asia. And so when he left the magazine and was going to move across the country to Colorado, I had to go on a away party for him. And I created this dish, chili shrimp and coconut grits. So the topping is sort of like a Singapore-style sautéed shrimp, real buttery, quite fiery. We use sambal. You can use your favorite sambal. And then the grits, I was like, well, we need to cook these in coconut milk with some smashed lemongrass. And I just have to tell you, it's kind of game-changing. So this super creamy grits with that little hint of like the nutty sweet coconut is perfect with the kind of spicy shrimp. So that sort of embodies the concept of the book. And thank you for the question.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So what makes my book different than other Southern baking books, and there have been a ton of them, something that I had to write into my proposal to write this book. I had to say, what is it about the South that makes baking special. We may think it's special because we live here. But what about the rest of the country? What about the rest of the world? What do they think about Southern baking? And they may wonder why is there so much talk about it? So I did the research, and I interviewed people across 14 states. I dove into archives, family diaries, and I think I mentioned before that the Southern baking is based on the land and the people. And I knew that the recipes that I included in the book needed to tell a story for many reasons. We needed to know our history. We need to know a younger generation today may not know a meringue pie, chocolate meringue pie, coconut cream meringue pie, lemon meringue pie, banana cream. My mother made all of them. And there's something just so lovely about a soft meringue on top of a pie, and something so resourceful as well. And that was a theme that went throughout the book, was the resourcefulness of the South. Because the South has been largely poor, largely isolated, and rural. We are an agrarian society. And I wrote this book so that the rest of the world can look at the South and maybe understand why we're so crazy right now. And I think that that's really it. I love that you picked the kolaches because I'd say every chapter I fell in love with. I opened the book with cornbread because to me, cornbread is the bread of the South, you know? And I can tell you after the research that corn grew everywhere in the South. Anybody could grow corn. And if you didn't grind it yourself, you could have it milled. So everyone had cornbread. But then I think it gets a little bit more interesting because with biscuits, that's white flour. Wheat did not grow everywhere in the South. White flour was precious, and biscuits were on Sunday. And then you go into quick bread. The South was a working region. People worked in the fields, they worked jobs. So that's why self-rising flour, self-rising cornmeal, baking powder, baking soda, all those leaveners became so popular because not everybody was going to spend the time with yeast. And then you get into yeast breads. So I'm from Middle Tennessee, and I grew up with yeast rolls, you know, every holiday. And I love making rolls, but I wanted to figure them out in this book so that people could understand and make yeast rolls again because it's just wonderful. And my granddaughter, who's 5, one thing she wants to do when she comes to Nini's house is to make dough, make rolls. And because it feels good, you know, it feels good in your hands, and boy, they taste good. And then on through pies and puddings. So to me, my baking book is the South baking book. It is not my book. I sneak in a few recipes, and they're really good. My mother's banana bread and the chess cake. But really, I wanted it to be representative of the South, and it very much is my love letter to the South.
Yes, so my book is called South of Somewhere, Recipes and Stories from My Life in South Africa, South Korea, and the American South. And the reason why it's special is because it is the first of its kind to be published here in the States overall. I haven't seen another South African cookbook by a larger publishing company, and it was just such an honor to be able to tell my story in it. It has always been a dream of mine to tell my story and to tell people about the things that make my recipe special to me. So my cookbook is kind of a memoir, and that is what my publisher actually wanted me to do. He wanted me to tell the stories. And if you're the kind of person that likes to read about the origin of a dish, you know, or more of a story behind a recipe, then my book is the one for you. Chef Enrika, you were talking about a dish called Shiba Shuka.
Shiba Shuka.
Yes. So most of the recipes in my cookbook are kind of fusion recipes from these 3 places. Some of them stand on their own, others mix 1 or 2 influences from other parts of the world. So Shiba Shuka is one of those recipes. In South Africa, we love to cook over an open fire. It's called braai. And, you know, when we have braai, which is mostly roasted lamb chops and sausage made from lamb and spices like coriander, and that speaks to our, you know, history because a lot of spices and things were brought from the East to South Africa with the slave trade, with Indian people that came to build the railways. So we use a lot of that spice in our cooking. So that dish, Shiba Shuka, actually started because I had this idea. We have Shiba that goes with braai in South Africa, and that's a tomato kind of relish. And Shiba Shuka is a Middle Eastern dish that also uses tomatoes, onion, garlic, and peppers. And so this dish is a prime example of kind of the fusion recipes that you could find in the book. And it's really so good. You could actually, if there's one recipe I think everybody should try, it is the boerewors burger. And I know it's really hard to say, but boerewors translates from Afrikaans to farmer's sausage in English. And just the combination of spices that you mix into the meat, it's a breakfast sandwich with an egg and with an, believe it or not, apricot chutney. The flavors in my book are sweet and savory, and that is kind of a nod to my Cape Malay heritage. So everything's really good. I love everything.
Yeah, so my book is called Robert St. John's Mississippi Mornings, and I'm a breakfast guy, and have always been a breakfast guy, and wanted to do a breakfast cookbook for a long time. One of our restaurants is a breakfast lunch spot called the Midtowner in Hattiesburg, and the bacon's a great recipe. I would be remiss if I didn't mention my grandmother's pancake recipe, which is in there. I've written about it so much that it's the most downloaded recipe on my website. So, I mean, there's that. And it's really, I mean, you think pancakes are pancakes. I mean, it's breakfast bread with syrup and butter. There's something different about, she was from Nashville and brought that, and that was like, I always say that pancakes are love. And if you think about that, I mean, when, other than eating out in a restaurant, when have you ever eaten pancakes and it wasn't someone you loved that made them for you, And that's my story. And so there's that recipe that's in there. And there's some stories about the South and growing up in the South. But I think what was the most surprising, what were the most surprising recipes were omelets. And when I started developing, I have the chef I use that I test recipes with, her name's Linda Roderick, and she and I have worked together for years. And this is, I don't know how many cookbooks we've worked on, but we sit down and I say, all right, this is what I'm thinking about doing, breakfast cookbook, and I've got a list of 120 recipes. I'm thinking about doing this, and I want to do it this, so make this, saute this, blah, blah, blah. I speak it out. She writes notes and records while I'm talking. But then we get in the kitchen and we start, working them up. And what happened with all the omelets that I didn't, because there's photography in this book. And a young lady named Kate Dearman from Nashville, who actually grew up in Hattiesburg, did an excellent job photographing the recipes in this book. And when we started making omelets, it's something I never thought of. But I mean, an omelet really is, what are you going to shoot? I mean, it's outside eggs. If you're cooking it properly, there's no color. It's just eggs and then a filling, and maybe you could show. And so my thought was, I want to develop a different topping, sauce or relish or something to put on top of these that'll match what's in them. And my thought originally was, I want to do that so it'll look good in a photograph. What happened is we came up with these toppings for these omelets that just took them to another level that I never expected and never planned on. And so that's really one of the things that was the most surprising thing maybe of any book I've ever done is that we came up with those things for one reason, for kind of a utilitarian reason. And the benefit was great. So yeah, it's called Mississippi Mornings, and a lot of my books have South in it, my South, Southern season, blah blah. But I've really kind of lately, I've kind of brought my scope into just Mississippi, and this is, how Texans feel about Texas. Texans are always proud of Texas, and they got this guy. I feel that way times 10 about Mississippi. And I just kind of came to a point to where I said, I'm going to own that. I'm going to own my home state that I love so much. And so there's a book coming. Actually, there's a book supposed to be coming out this year. It's Mississippi Christmas. But we have this Eudora Welty thing that's the next panel, by the way, you're not doing anything at 2:45, follow me up to the Fellowship Hall, the Eudora Welty book, and we're screening the new Eudora Welty documentary, which won't actually air until November. But so with that book coming out, I postponed the Christmas book, but we'll have to come back and talk about the Christmas book next. So, but it's a good one too.
Well, okay, so thank you for that. So I have another group activity question. So we were talking a lot about pantries and ingredients and nostalgia and all of those things. And so I wanted to know what items are in your pantry from nostalgia or from tradition, and what is the most random thing that you have purchased in the most that you use literally one time, and you're like, I have no idea what to do with the rest of this. So and this can go in any direction. I'll actually start. So my favorite thing is Campbell's tomato soup, because in my grandmother's house it was always on the bottom right of her cabinet. She would have her cutting board where she would always make her biscuits, like wedged in between the refrigerator and the cabinet. And I always knew, no matter what, that there was always like stacks of Campbell's tomato soup. So I have that in my cabinet. Do I eat it? Probably not, but not as often. But I have it in there because that just makes me feel nostalgic. And the most random thing that I bought is this black garlic, this dried black garlic. And so I've just been using it like with coffee and cacao nibs. I've been trying to get rid of it because because I have like several different varieties of dried garlic. So I was just like, that was a very impulsive buy to get black garlic. So those are my two. So who's next?
Can I jump in? Y'all mind?
Sure.
All right, I'm gonna do this before I forget. But I don't know if this is your experience, but I mean, we'll have parties at our house and people will go and look in the cabinet and look in the refrigerator. They're like, I want to see what you made.
Yeah.
And everybody's always surprised because
Yes.
I think they're looking for, foams and all this elaborate, kind of crazy stuff. Maybe y'all experience that. Maybe y'all have that in your refrigerator. But, I'll tell you the thing from my childhood that I still eat. And I mean, I own a bakery and bring home a lot of really, really, really good baked goods. But those whop 'em on the counter orange sweet rolls, Pillsbury orange Danish, they're called. They're really not Danish, but they're called that. Actually, I ate some at the lake house the other night. I bought some of those things. That and milk. I mean, that reminds me of. I also have Captain Crunch. I ate Captain Crunch. When you write about food, also you get. Like, I get things in the mail. Thank you. If anybody sent me something over the years, thank you. I appreciate it. Unless you're the person that sent canned possum. I actually got canned possum one time. It's still, I haven't opened it, so it's rancid by now. It's sitting on my shelf. But I end up with so many, I don't know, I would defer to Jill, is there anything in our cabinets that, yeah. I'm kind of a compulsive person, and so I purchase a lot that I never do anything with. It just sits. I like to look at it, and then it expires.
Yeah.
We have many, and she won't throw anything out. So you go look in our cabinet right now. There's, expiration date 2013 on something. Spices that would, if we tried to open and shake out, it'd be just one clump just hitting in the thing. So. If you come to my house, you're going to be very surprised. But I mean, we eat nice, we eat well a good bit, but we also, I don't mind eating some crap every once in a while.
I'm kind of an impulsive shopper myself when it comes to random ingredients. I think if you're interested in cooking and food, you always want to learn more about certain ingredients. So I have a wide variety. And a lot of cooks in town who either have a restaurant, they always call me up and say, hey, Dill, do you have ube paste by any chance? And I'll say, yeah, sure, I do. They're like, how random? Why do you have this in your pantry?
I actually have ube paste.
Yeah,
Like,
it's so
truthfully, I
random, a
have that
Filipino
as well.
ingredient, by the way. Yeah, so the most nostalgic ingredient that I have in my pantry is probably a can of peaches. I don't eat a lot of canned peaches, but I keep it there because it reminds me of this time when we were kids. We were three girls, my sisters and I, and at one point in our lives, my mom could only afford to go and buy dented cans. We lived down the road from a canned food factory, and they would sell the dented cans at a discount. But the only caveat is there wouldn't be any labels on the cans. So she would buy a box for, say, $5, and it'd have 50 cans in it. And on a Sunday, her tradition was that we would have canned peaches with a can of evaporated milk. And she would say, Dale, Aretha, and Kim, those are my sisters, go and find a can of peaches.
Yeah.
And we, usually we were on our sixth can, opening our sixth can before we found the peaches. Sometimes it was pears, that wasn't a good Sunday. Sometimes it was that mixed fruit cocktail, which was even worse. And we used to, pour the ideal milk over there, ideal milk or evaporated milk, and she would put it in the freezer for a bit so it was ice cold when we ate it. And that is a very Cape Malay kind of a dessert to have after a spicy curry meal or something that's inspired, by our Indian roots. And so that's the most nostalgic ingredient that I have. And I think a lot of the ingredients that I have now are focused on my love for Japan. I love salted plum, umeboshi. I love using it in vinaigrettes and things like that. It's really surprising. If you eat it on its own, it's quite salty, but there's nothing better than salted plum on some steamed short grain rice. And I think I've also looked to Anne's book a lot for inspiration on how to use various ingredients in my pantry. Yeah.
Well, canned milk also. I think Malcolm and I were talking about that 2 nights ago. Canned milk would be the ingredient that I think is most nostalgic in my pantry because it reminds me of my mother and my grandmother. And if you had canned milk in the South, you could make something, right? I mean, you could make a cake, you could make fudge, make the filling for German chocolate cake. You were ready to go. So canned milk really speaks to me, but so does swan's down flour, swan's down cake flour. That's my grandmother. She had the little swan's down, measuring cup that came with it. I guess she ripped off the back coupon and sent it in for the measuring cup. And with this book, I really learned that the South has used so few ingredients to make so many things. It's almost the opposite of what we're talking about here and having this global pantry. The South did not have a global pantry. It used what was in the backyard. And so that was phenomenal to me. But so many cornmeals for the cornbread chapter, so many different types of heirloom flours that are now grown, and the wheat is grown in North Carolina in old tobacco fields. I was fascinated by all of these ingredients. So I guess that would be my splurge. I want to buy a white lamaze flour or purple straw or something old, and I'll spend $10 a bag for it, and I'm not throwing the rest away. So my freezers are stocked. I have an encyclopedia of cornmeal from different regions in Virginia and different flours. I love them. And probably the splurgy stuff I buy is jams and jellies that somebody else made. And I don't, I'm always a sucker for that. I mean, if somebody's going to go to the trouble and make peach preserves, I'm going to buy it. So, yeah.
I also love canned milk. My grandfather used to put evaporated milk in his coffee, and whenever I'm using it for a recipe, I just take it way out of the can. I love it. And don't even get me started on sweetened condensed milk because that is so good. My nostalgic ingredient, I'm going to kind of turn the idea of nostalgia maybe on its head a little. It's an ingredient that I did not grow up with, but I made sure my kids grew up with it. It's the Japanese ingredient. I'm sure I'm going to mispronounce it, but I call it furikake.
Yes.
The little rice sprinkle. It's crumbled up seaweed and toasted sesame seeds and various other ingredients. And when we were researching ingredients for this book, it has like a cool history, I think. It was created in Japan to address a calcium deficiency, I think in the 1920s. And so it used ground up fish bones, which is umami, and then to make it taste better, that's where the sesame seeds and the seaweed came in, and sprinkle it over rice. But my kids love rice. We always had it on rice whenever we made ramen bowls, or if on eggs, avocado toast, noodles, whatever. So our kids, they're twins, and they just left for college a few weeks ago. So I'm in, sad, empty nester mom, oh, woe is me mode. But when they left, they were like, oh, well, one thing for sure that we need, like it's part of the essentials, is some furikake. And I sent them with 2 jars, and they ran out last week. They already need more. And so it just kind of makes me happy. So the one, I guess, regret pantry ingredient was given to me. My husband and I went to Mississippi State, Hale State. It's a bottle of Bulldog Red wine. I will never open it, bless its heart, but I will never get rid of it. It will always be in our pantry.
I've got to jump in on the canned milk thing here. So my second cookbook is called Deep South Staples, or How to Survive in a Southern Kitchen Without a Can of Cream of Mushroom Soup. Long title. Carol actually wrote the foreword of that book. But it's about recipes that I grew up eating, kind of the heritage cuisine, updated and modernized to modern techniques and things. And so to do this kind of food, I needed a mac and cheese recipe. And I never ate, it's not a snobby kind of thing, but it's never, my mom never cooked mac and cheese growing up. I never ate it. And so it's one of those things when we're working on the book, I talked to Linda, I said, look, I never ate mac and cheese, I don't know it. What about it? She said, oh man, she graduated top of her class at CIA. She said, I got the mac and cheese. So she did, and she used evaporated milk along with several cheeses to do this thing. Well, my secretary, when she's transcribing the recipes that go in the book to send off, where it said evaporated milk, she actually entered condensed milk. And you want to taste the worst mac and cheese you've ever tasted? And if you have the first edition of that book, it's supposed to be evaporated milk, not sweetened condensed milk. So just to let you know, there's a typo in that second book there.
That's funny.
It's the wrong canned milk.
That's funny.
So we are going to open the floor for questions. Does anyone have any questions? We can raise our hand and we can get to them as soon as we can. Yes.
Maybe repeat the question.
No, ma'am. Umeboshi is just a plum, just a fruit, and they salt it, and it kind of ferments for a little bit, and it's eaten as a condiment. So, yes, it does come in a jar. You can actually buy it at Whole Foods in a little jar. It says umeboshi on it. It's really, really good, and it's really good in marinated as well. It adds a lot of umami flavor, little salty umami flavor. Yeah. Welcome. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, boy, that's a good question, because we did have to cut a fair amount of content once paper prices soared, thanks to COVID. Oh, my gosh. I'm totally blanking. I might have to go to another question. I can look on my phone, and I can tell. I'm so sorry, but I am drawing a complete blank, but I will get back.
I can tell you the recipes that were cut out of my book because it's still fresh and it's still painful. So I know. I'm just telling you. But mine is just published last week, so there's a difference. Yeah.
Okay, y'all go ahead. It'll take me a minute.
That's a good question. You don't fight back about the cost of paper. I mean, you're just, yeah. Oh, definitely. You have to make a case, like, standing up for a recipe because you get personally involved with the recipe. With mine, I researched the story. I interviewed people. I even maybe traveled there and went there. I love this recipe. And when in the kitchen, it was fantastic. So those were the recipes that were impossible to cut because I knew that they worked today. Some of them that maybe had a historical story, but weren't as strong, in the kitchen. Those were the ones such as scuppernong pie and vinegar pie from the mountain. I had a dinner party and I made vinegar pie, and I loved it, but there were some thumbs down there. So, yeah.
So I had 4 books with a national publisher, but now I self-publish everything, and so I really, if I want it in there, I'll put it in there. So maybe that's not good. Everybody needs an editor. So
Are there any more questions? Okay.
Oh, I'm going to give everybody my tip, Malcolm? I thought that was just you and me. Yeah, if you want meringue to glisten, up the sugar a little bit. So the general rule on a ratio on making a soft meringue for a pie is 2 tablespoons of sugar for every egg white that you beat. That is basic. But if you want it special, go up to 3 tablespoons of sugar. And it will shine, and it also will hold better. It won't weep back as likely. It will hold better. And then if you really want to make a statement, crack a few extra eggs, toss the yolks because you haven't used them in the filling, and just beat more egg whites. 3 tablespoons for every egg white, and you'll get those mile-high meringues like they make in the Delta. Yeah. The beady stuff. Some of that stuff is out of our control. A meringue weeping and beating and all. I think it depends on humidity. It just depends on so many things. Did you carry that meringue all the way and seal it, on the crust edge? Which I know my mother was picky about that you had to do that. But I like a meringue that isn't all the way to the crust because I like to kind of get a tease of, what's inside. Yeah.
Yes.
I'll hop in, but let y'all think about it. Yeah, I'll tell you one of the great things at our house during COVID, especially during the meat of the lockdown, is every member of the family took a night. And it was their night to do, and we had theme nights, and I'm going to tell you, there's so much bad that was happening during that period, and it's so strange to look back. But one of the positive things that I'll always look back on is our family, our son was a freshman in college. He was home. Everybody was together there for like 8 or 9 weeks, in the house. We were cooking. Unfortunately, restaurants were closed for the most part. And everybody just took a night, which was good unless my daughter had the night. She was that was not good on that night. But I really developed a lot of those breakfast recipes then as well. I didn't mean to jump in, but
I think I got my cookbook deal towards the end of COVID. It was just published last year. And I think it gave me a lot of time to really think about what I wanted to do. And it's just my husband and I, so he was really, there he is in the cowboy hat. We were a team, he would tell me his honest opinion about recipes. I started with the dessert chapter, which, is his favorite, and which just made COVID more bearable, I would say, was.
I was working on the Global Pantry Cookbook at the front end of COVID, but I was also on assignment from outlets like Weight Watchers and SouthernLiving.com to do a lot of cooking with frozen vegetables and canned beans, and the kind of stock your pantry with emergency items kind of cooking. And that was challenging and a lot of fun and very rewarding, and was about the only thing I could do at that time because there was so much you couldn't get even at the grocery stores. Y'all all remember what that was like. But it expanded my repertoire. Kind of, when you get involved in these cookbook projects, you're so siloed and focused on something that could at times feel very niche, but that kind of brought me back into reality. So it was nice.
And yeah, I had 2 grown children come home. So that changed everything, and there were more people in the kitchen for sure. But what we did was I did some Zooms with my sister in Atlanta who had never been able to really make bread like she wanted to make bread, and we made challah, Jewish braided bread, one day, and then so her daughter-in-law found out about it, and she wanted an invitation to Zoom, and all of a sudden these little Zoom classes got bigger throughout our family to help younger people and my sister who'd never been comfortable making bread watch me make it. So it was really a good and a bad time. For sure.
So if I could jump back and answer that question, that thank you. The question was, were there any pantry ingredients that we had to cut from the book that I would love to tout? And there were several, and I'll just briefly mention a couple of them. So pandan leaves, if you don't know them, they're the just most fragrant, wonderful vanilla-y and herby.
Yep.
Beautiful ingredient, great in desserts. Pandan flavoring is trash. I'll just say, I just hate it. No, it's fine in a pinch. Tapioca, I love the texture. No one else in my house does, but I do. I love it for thickening fruit pies, and I love just like tapioca pudding. And then the last one is a very unsexy ingredient, but it's double concentrated tomato paste. You know, that kind of comes in the tube. Invaluable. A million uses.
Okay, so that wraps up our panel. Thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you for being such an amazing audience. Thanks to the panel. Thank you guys for coming. Thanks for the cookbooks.